The needle pricked Willa Preston's calloused finger for the third time that morning, drawing a bead of blood that she quickly wiped on her already stained apron before it could soil the shirt she was mending. She sat on an overturned crate outside the Mercantile in Montezuma, Colorado, her makeshift workspace spread across her lap as miners and ranchers passed by without so much as a glance. It was early September 1883, and the mountain town was bustling with activity as men prepared for the coming winter. But none of them seemed to notice the young woman with auburn hair struggling to make a living with her needle and thread. Willa had been in Montezuma for 6 months now, ever since the fever took her mother and left her alone in a world that had little patience for a 20-year-old woman with no family and no fortune. She had sold everything they owned to pay for the doctor and the burial, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's sewing kit. The boarding house where she rented a corner of a shared room cost $2 a week, and she earned it penny by penny, mending torn shirts and patching worn trousers for strangers who barely acknowledged her existence. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency as she worked on a miner's shirt, closing a tear in the sleeve with tiny, invisible stitches. The work was meticulous, demanding her full attention, but her mind wandered to the empty feeling in her stomach. She had skipped breakfast again, saving the last of her bread for dinner. If she could finish 3 more items today, she would have enough to buy a small piece of salt pork and some beans. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting shorter shadows on the dusty Main Street. Willa's back ached from hunching over her work, but she did not dare stop. Every moment spent idle was a moment she could have been earning. She had just finished the miner's shirt and was reaching for the next item in her pile when a shadow fell across her lap. "You do good work." The voice was deep and warm, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas or maybe Oklahoma. Willa looked up, squinting against the bright sunlight. The man standing before her was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dusty leather chaps over dark trousers and a blue cotton shirt that had seen better days. His hat was pulled low over his face, but she could see strong features, a straight nose and eyes the color of summer grass. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. "Thank you, sir," Willa said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was not used to compliments, especially not from men who looked like they could afford to have their mending done by the seamstress who worked out of her home on the edge of town. "I have been watching you all morning," he said, and there was something in his tone that made her heart skip. "You have not stopped once, not even to rest your hands." Willa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I cannot afford to rest, sir. Time is money, as they say." He crouched down so they were at eye level, and she could see his face more clearly now. He was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw covered in a few days' worth of stubble and eyes that held a kindness she had not expected. "How much do you make in a day doing this?" The question was forward, perhaps even rude, but there was genuine curiosity in his voice rather than mockery. Willa hesitated, then decided honesty could do no harm. On a good day, maybe 50 cents, sometimes less. Something flickered in his green eyes, something that might have been anger or perhaps sadness. 50 cents, he repeated, shaking his head. "That is barely enough to keep body and soul together." "It is what it is," Willa said, straightening her spine despite the ache. "I manage." The cowboy was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. Then he stood up, towering over her once more. "My name is Parker Quinn. I run a small ranch about 5 miles west of here. Nothing fancy, just 100 head of cattle and a decent piece of land, but I am doing well enough." Willa did not know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and picked up the next item from her pile, a pair of trousers with a torn knee. "I have a proposition for you," Parker said, and his voice held a note of determination. "Mend only mine. I will provide everything you need." Her hand stilled, the needle hovering above the fabric. "I do not understand." "I am saying you do not need to sit out here in the sun, working your fingers to the bone for pennies from strangers who do not appreciate the skill it takes to do what you do." He gestured at her pile of mending. "Come work for me. Mend my clothes, darn my socks, keep my shirts in good repair. I will pay you a fair wage, enough to rent a proper room and buy decent food. You will have a roof over your head and security." Willa's mind raced. It sounded too good to be true, and her mother had always taught her that when something sounded too good to be true, it usually was. "Why would you do that?" she asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. "You do not even know me." "I know you are a hard worker," Parker said. "I know you take pride in your craft, and I know you deserve better than this." He gestured at the dusty street, the overturned crate, the pile of strangers' clothes. "I am not asking for anything improper if that is what worries you. You would have your own space, your own privacy. I just need someone who can keep my things in order, and you need a steady income. It seems like a fair arrangement to me." Willa wanted to say yes immediately, but years of hardship had taught her caution. "I would need to think about it." "Of course," Parker said, nodding. "Take your time. I will be in town for supplies today, staying at the hotel tonight and heading back to the ranch tomorrow morning. If you decide you are interested, meet me at the hotel at dawn. If not, I will not trouble you again." He tipped his hat to her and walked away, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Willa watched him go, her heart pounding in her chest. The offer was tempting, almost unbearably so, but something held her back. She had learned the hard way that men rarely offered help without expecting something in return. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Willa finished the trousers and moved on to a coat that needed new buttons, but her mind was not on her work. She kept replaying Parker Quinn's words in her head, analyzing every detail, looking for the trap she was certain must be there. But no matter how many times she went over the conversation, she could not find it. He had seemed genuine, his offer straightforward. By the time the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the street, Willa had made up her mind. She would meet him at dawn. Even if his offer turned out to be less innocent than it seemed, it could not be worse than slowly starving on the streets of Montezuma. At least she would have a chance, and chances were something she had been desperately short of lately. That night, in the cramped room she shared with two other women, Willa lay awake on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. One of her roommates snored softly, while the other tossed and turned, muttering in her sleep. Willa's mind wandered to Parker Quinn, to his green eyes and his strong hands, to the way he had looked at her as though she were someone worth noticing. She told herself not to get her hopes up, but it was too late. For the first time in months, she felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. The first light of dawn was just beginning to paint the sky pink and gold when Willa made her way to the hotel. She had packed her few belongings into a worn canvas bag, everything she owned in the world fitting easily into something she could carry with one hand. Her mother's sewing kit was tucked carefully inside, wrapped in a piece of cloth to protect it. Parker was waiting outside the hotel, standing next to a sturdy bay horse and a smaller paint mare. When he saw her approaching, his face broke into a smile that transformed his features, making him look younger and more approachable. "You came," he said, and there was unmistakable relief in his voice. "I did," Willa replied, suddenly shy. In the morning light, with no work to occupy her hands, she felt awkward and uncertain. "I am glad." He took her bag and secured it to the saddle of the paint mare. "This is Rosie. She is gentle and patient, perfect for someone who might not have much riding experience." Willa's cheeks burned. "I have never actually ridden a horse before." "That is all right," Parker said easily. "I will teach you. For today, you can ride with me if you prefer, and we will lead Rosie. Or you can try riding her now, and I will stay right beside you." The thought of riding pressed against Parker Quinn for 5 miles made Willa's heart race for reasons she did not want to examine too closely. "I will try Rosie," she said quickly. Parker helped her mount, his hands strong and steady on her waist as he lifted her into the saddle. Willa gripped the saddle horn tightly, feeling the unfamiliar sensation of being so high off the ground. Rosie shifted beneath her, and Willa's fingers tightened. "Just relax," Parker said, his voice soothing. "She can feel your tension. Take a deep breath and let your body move with hers." It was easier said than done, but Willa tried. As they started moving with Parker on his bay horse beside her, she began to get a feel for the rhythm of Rosie's gait. It was not as terrifying as she had expected, and by the time they left the main street of Montezuma behind, she was starting to enjoy the experience. The ride to Parker's ranch took them through some of the most beautiful country Willa had ever seen. The mountains rose up on either side of them, their peaks still dusted with snow even in early September. Aspen trees lined the trail, their leaves just beginning to turn gold at the edges. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and sage. Parker talked as they rode, telling her about his ranch, about the cattle he raised and the land he worked. He had come to Colorado 3 years ago from Oklahoma, he said, with nothing but a horse and a dream. He had worked for other ranchers, saved every penny, and finally bought his own place 2 years ago. It was not much, he admitted, but it was his. "Do you run it alone?" Willa asked, curiosity overcoming her shyness. "Mostly," Parker said. "I hire a couple of hands during roundup and branding season, but the rest of the year it is just me. I have been managing, but there are things I am not good at. Mending is one of them. I have a pile of shirts that need attention, and I am running out of socks without holes in them." Willa laughed, the sound surprising even to herself. She could not remember the last time she had laughed. "I can certainly help with that." The ranch, when they finally reached it, was modest but well-maintained. The main house was a solid log structure with a covered porch and a stone chimney. There was a barn, a corral with several horses, and in the distance, Willa could see cattle grazing in a broad meadow. Mountains rose up behind the property, creating a natural barrier that was breathtaking in its beauty. "It is lovely," Willa said, and she meant it. Parker looked pleased. "Thank you. I have put a lot of work into it." He dismounted and helped Willa down from Rosie, his hands once again steady on her waist. This close, she could smell leather and sage and something that was distinctly him, and it made her head spin. He showed her around the property, pointing out the various buildings and explaining how everything worked. The house had 3 rooms, he told her. His bedroom, a main room that served as kitchen and living area, and a small storage room that he had already cleared out for her. "It is not much," he said, opening the door to show her a space barely large enough for a narrow bed and a small dresser. "But it is private, and it is warm. I put a new mattress on the bed yesterday, and there are blankets in the dresser." Willa stepped into the room, hardly able to believe what she was seeing. After months of sharing a cramped space with 2 other women, having a room of her own felt like unimaginable luxury. There was even a small window that looked out toward the mountains. "It is perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Parker cleared his throat, looking suddenly uncomfortable. "I should tell you the terms of our arrangement. You will mend my clothes and keep the house in order, do some cooking if you are willing. In exchange, I will pay you $3 a week, plus room and board. You are free to leave whenever you want, and I will expect the same courtesy if I decide the arrangement is not working. Does that sound fair? $3 a week. Willa's mind boggled at the amount. That was more than she had made in a month sitting on the street in Montezuma. That is more than fair. It is generous. You will earn it, Parker said. I have let things pile up, and I should warn you I am not an easy man to live with. I keep odd hours and I am not used to having someone else around. We will both need to adjust. I understand, Willa said. And she did. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. She needed to remember that, needed to keep her growing attraction to this kind, handsome cowboy firmly in check. He was her employer, and she could not afford to jeopardize this opportunity by developing feelings that would never be returned. The first few days at the ranch were a whirlwind of activity. Parker showed Willa where everything was kept, explained his routines, and then gave her space to settle in. The pile of mending he had mentioned turned out to be a mountainous collection of torn shirts, worn trousers, and socks that were more whole than fabric. Willa set up a work area in the main room, near the window where the light was best, and got to work. It was different from mending for strangers on the street. Here, she could take her time, making sure each stitch was perfect. She learned Parker's preferences, the way he liked his collars, the length of his sleeves. She darned his socks with care, reinforcing the weak spots so they would last longer. And as she worked with his clothes, handling the fabric he wore against his skin, she found herself thinking about him more than she should. Parker was a good employer, respectful and considerate. He never entered her room without knocking, never made her feel uncomfortable or threatened. But Willa could not help but notice the way his eyes lingered on her sometimes, a warm expression in their green depths that made her heart flutter. She told herself she was imagining it, that he was just being kind. As the days turned into weeks, they settled into a comfortable routine. Parker would rise before dawn to tend to the cattle and horses, while Willa would start breakfast. They would eat together, making small talk about the weather or the ranch, and then Parker would head out for the day's work while Willa tackled her mending and housekeeping. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch together, watching the sun set behind the mountains and talk about everything and nothing. It was during these evening conversations that Willa began to truly know Parker Quinn. He told her about his childhood in Oklahoma, about the father who had been a hard man but fair, about the mother he had lost when he was just 15. He spoke of his dreams for the ranch, his hope to expand the herd and maybe one day hire permanent hands so he would not have to do everything himself. In turn, Willa found herself opening up in ways she never had before. She told him about her mother, about the fever that had taken her, about the desperate months that followed. She spoke of her fears and her loneliness, of the way she had felt invisible in Montezuma, just another face in the crowd. "You could never be invisible," Parker said one evening, his voice soft in the gathering darkness. "Not to anyone with eyes to see." Willa's breath caught in her throat. "Parker." "I know," he said quickly. "I know this is just a business arrangement. I am not trying to make things complicated. I just wanted you to know that I see you, Willa. I see how hard you work, how much you care about even the smallest task. I see your strength and your kindness. You are not invisible, not to me." Willa did not know what to say to that. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. They sat in silence for a while longer, and Willa could feel something shifting between them, something that both thrilled and terrified her. She had not come here looking for love. She had come here looking for survival. But somehow, without her quite noticing when it happened, Parker Quinn had become more than just her employer. He had become her friend, and she was beginning to suspect he was becoming something even more than that. October arrived with a cold snap that frosted the grass in the mornings and turned the aspen leaves to brilliant gold. Parker began preparing for winter, chopping wood and stacking it near the house, checking the barn for leaks and reinforcing weak spots. Willa helped where she could, learning new skills and marveling at how different her life had become in just a few short weeks. One afternoon, while Parker was out moving cattle to a lower pasture, Willa was in the main room working on a new shirt she was making for him. His old ones were so worn that even her best mending could not save some of them, so she had taken it upon herself to make him a new one. She had bought the fabric with some of the money he had paid her, choosing a deep green that she thought would complement his eyes. She was so focused on her work that she did not hear the horse approach, did not know anyone was there until the door burst open and a man stumbled inside. He was thin and ragged, with wild eyes and a gun in his hand. Willa gasped, dropping the shirt and jumping to her feet. "Where is he?" The man demanded, his voice rough and desperate. "Where is Parker Quinn?" "He is not here," Willa said, trying to keep her voice steady even though her heart was racing. "He is out with the cattle. He will not be back for hours." The man cursed, a vile string of words that made Willa flinch. "I know he is here. I have been watching. I have seen you two playing house, acting like you are something special." "I do not know who you are or what you want," Willa said, edging toward the door. "But you need to leave. Now." "I am not leaving until I get what I am owed," the man said, stepping further into the room. "Parker Quinn ruined my life, and he is going to pay for it." Willa's mind raced, trying to figure out how to handle this situation. The man was clearly unstable, and the gun in his hand was shaking, which made him even more dangerous. "What did he do to you?" she asked, hoping to keep him talking until she could think of a way out. "He stole from me," the man spat. 2 years ago, we were working the same ranch. I had a stake in some cattle, a way to make something of myself. But Parker convinced the boss I was stealing, got me fired and run off. I lost everything because of him." Willa did not believe for a second that Parker would do something like that, but arguing with an armed man seemed like a poor strategy. "I am sure there has been a misunderstanding. If you wait for him to return, you can talk to him, sort it out peacefully." "There is nothing to sort out," the man said, raising the gun. "I am going to make him suffer the way I suffered, and I am going to start by hurting what he cares about." The gun swung toward Willa, and time seemed to slow down. She saw the man's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the mad gleam in his eyes. And then the door behind her slammed open, and Parker was there, moving faster than she would have thought possible for a man his size. He tackled the intruder, knocking the gun from his hand. It went skittering across the floor as the two men grappled. Willa scrambled to grab it, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. The fight was brutal and quick. Parker had size and strength on his side, and within moments he had the other man pinned to the floor, his knee in the man's back. "Willa, there is rope in the barn," Parker said, his voice strained. "Can you get it?" She ran, faster than she had ever run in her life, and returned with the rope. Together, they tied the intruder's hands behind his back. Only then did Parker seem to relax slightly, though Willa could see the tension still coiled in his muscles. "Martin Hayes," Parker said, and there was a note of sadness in his voice. "I should have known you would show up eventually." "You ruined me," Hayes said, but there was less venom in his voice now, more defeat. "You ruined yourself," Parker replied. "You were caught red-handed altering brands trying to claim cattle that were not yours. I did not convince the boss of anything. I just reported what I saw." "You could have looked the other way." "No," Parker said firmly. "I could not. That would have made me as bad as you." They took Hayes to the sheriff in Montezuma that evening, riding through the darkness with the prisoner tied to his saddle. The sheriff took Hayes into custody without much fuss. Apparently he had been causing trouble in other towns as well, and assured Parker that Hayes would be spending a long time behind bars. On the ride back to the ranch, Willa and Parker were both quiet, processing what had happened. It was only when they were back home, standing in the main room where the attack had taken place, that Parker finally spoke. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I never should have put you in danger like that. If I had known Hayes was in the area, I would have taken precautions, I would have." "It is not your fault," Willa interrupted. "You could not have known he would come here. But he did come here, and he threatened you because of me." Parker ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "When I came back and saw him with that gun pointed at you, I thought my heart would stop. Willa, if anything had happened to you." He trailed off, and Willa saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It was the same thing she had been trying to deny in herself, the same feeling that kept her awake at night. "Nothing happened," she said softly. "You got there in time. I am fine." "You are more than fine," Parker said, taking a step toward her. "You are brave and strong, and Willa, I know this started as a business arrangement. I know I had no right to feel anything more than a professional regard for you, but I cannot help it. Somewhere along the way, you became the most important person in my life." Willa's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Parker, You do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know I am probably making a mess of this. You work for me, and it is not right for me to put you in an uncomfortable position. If you want to leave, I will understand. I will give you a good reference, help you find another situation." "I do not want to leave," Willa said, finding her courage. "I want to stay. Not because of the job, but because of you. Because somewhere along the way, you became the most important person in my life, too." The smile that spread across Parker's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Really, really," Willa confirmed, her own lips curving into a smile. Parker closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his hands coming up to cup her face. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice husky. "Yes," Willa breathed, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss was everything she had imagined and more. It was gentle and passionate all at once, full of promise and possibility. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Willa felt as though the world had shifted on its axis. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Parker admitted, resting his forehead against hers. "So have I," Willa said with a laugh. They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, and Willa felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt safe. She felt cherished. She felt loved. The next few weeks were the happiest of Willa's life. She and Parker made no effort to hide their feelings anymore, and the ranch became filled with laughter and warmth. They still maintained the routine they had established, but now there were stolen kisses in the morning, hands held over dinner, and long evenings on the porch wrapped in each other's arms. Parker was courting her properly, he said. He wanted to do things right. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow, carved her a sewing box to replace her mother's worn one, and treated her with such tenderness that Willa sometimes had to blink back tears of joy. "I never thought I could have this," she told him one evening as they watched the stars come out. "When my mother died, I thought happiness was something that happened to other people." "You deserve all the happiness in the world," Parker said, pulling her closer. "And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it. The rest of your life." Willa teased, though her heart was racing. "If you will have me," Parker said, suddenly serious. He pulled back so he could look into her eyes. "Willa Preston, I know we have not known each other very long, By conventional standards, it is probably too soon. But when you know, you know. And I know that I want to spend every day for the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me? Tears spilled down Willa's cheeks, but they were happy tears. Yes, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, Parker, I will marry you. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Willa felt as though she was finally, truly home. They were married in November in a simple ceremony at the church in Montezuma. Willa wore a new dress she had made herself, pale blue with lace at the collar and cuffs. Parker wore the green shirt she had sewn for him, and he looked so handsome that Willa could hardly believe he was really hers. The preacher kept the ceremony short, and when he pronounced them man and wife, Parker kissed Willa with such enthusiasm that several of the witnesses laughed. They celebrated with a meal at the hotel, inviting everyone who had helped them along the way, and then rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn," Parker said as he helped her down from Rosie. "It has a nice ring to it," Willa said with a smile. That night, as they lay together in Parker's bed, which was now their bed, Willa reflected on how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been sitting on a crate in Montezuma, mending clothes for strangers and wondering how she would survive. Now she was married to a wonderful man, living on a beautiful ranch, and looking forward to a future filled with love and possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Parker asked, his fingers trailing gently up and down her arm. "Just how lucky I am," Willa said. "How lucky we are." "I am the lucky one," Parker said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You came into my life when I did not even know I was lonely. You filled spaces I did not know were empty." Willa turned in his arms so she could look at him. "We saved each other," she said simply. "Yes," Parker agreed. "We did." The winter that followed was harsh, with heavy snows that sometimes kept them housebound for days at a time. But Willa did not mind. She had everything she needed right there in that cozy log house. She spent her days cooking and cleaning, sewing and mending, and taking care of Parker. He spent his days tending to the cattle and horses, cutting wood and maintaining the property, and taking care of her. They were partners in every sense of the word, working together to build a life. Parker taught Willa to ride properly, and she discovered she had a natural affinity for horses. She taught Parker to cook more than just basic trail food, and he discovered he actually enjoyed working in the kitchen when he had good company. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Parker reading aloud from a book while Willa worked on her sewing. Sometimes they would just talk, sharing their thoughts and dreams. And at night they would fall asleep in each other's arms, warm and content. By the time spring arrived, melting the snow and coaxing new grass from the ground, Willa had news. She was pregnant. Parker's joy was so complete, so overwhelming that he actually picked her up and spun her around, laughing like a child. "Careful," Willa said, though she was laughing too. "You will make me dizzy." "I am going to be a father," Parker said, setting her down gently. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Willa confirmed, placing her hand over her still flat stomach. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Parker said, kneeling down so he could press his ear against her belly. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I just want you to know that you are already loved more than you can imagine." Willa's eyes filled with tears as she ran her fingers through Parker's hair. This man, this wonderful, kind, loving man, was going to be the father of her child. She could not have asked for anything more. The pregnancy was not easy. Willa suffered from terrible morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and there were days when she could barely keep anything down. Parker was endlessly patient, holding her hair back when she was ill, bringing her weak tea and dry toast, and never once complaining about the extra work her condition created. As her belly grew, Parker became almost comically protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy, would not let her ride horseback, and followed her around the house like a worried sheepdog whenever she tried to do any work that required her to reach or stretch. "I am pregnant, not fragile," Willa would protest, but secretly she loved his attentiveness. "You are carrying precious cargo," Parker would reply, placing a gentle hand on her swollen belly. "I am not taking any chances." In late October, almost exactly a year after Parker had first asked Willa to marry him, she went into labor. It was a long, difficult process that tested both of them. Parker stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, even though he was clearly terrified. Finally, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, their son was born. He came into the world screaming his displeasure, tiny fists waving, and Willa thought she had never heard a more beautiful sound. "It is a boy," the midwife said, placing the baby on Willa's chest. "A strong, healthy boy." Willa looked down at her son, at his red face and dark hair, and felt a love so profound it took her breath away. Parker was beside her, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his child for the first time. "He is perfect," Parker said, his voice thick with emotion. "Willa, he is perfect." "What should we name him?" Willa asked, unable to take her eyes off her son. "I have been thinking about that," Parker said. "What do you think of James?" "James Patrick Quinn, James," Willa repeated, testing the name. "I love it. James Patrick Quinn. Welcome to the world, little James." The baby quieted at the sound of his mother's voice, his tiny hand wrapping around Willa's finger. Parker leaned down and pressed a kiss to Willa's forehead, then to his son's downy head. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for this gift." "We made him together," Willa said. "He is ours." The first few months of James's life were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. He was a demanding baby, waking frequently to feed and rarely sleeping for more than a few hours at a time. Willa was constantly tired, but she had never been happier. Parker helped as much as he could, walking the floor with James when he was fussy, changing nappies, and taking over household chores so Willa could rest. They fell into a new routine, one that revolved around the needs of their son. Parker still tended to the ranch, but he made sure to spend as much time as possible with his family. He would come in from his work and scoop James up, talking to him about the cattle and the horses, about the land they would one day pass on to him. As James grew, his personality began to emerge. He was a serious baby, studying the world around him with solemn dark eyes. He had Parker's strong features and Willa's auburn hair, and he rarely cried without good reason. By his first birthday, he was walking and getting into everything, his curiosity seemingly endless. "He has your determination," Parker told Willa one day as they watched James repeatedly try to climb up on a chair, falling each time but never giving up. "He has your stubbornness," Willa countered with a laugh. Life on the ranch continued to be good. Parker's herd had grown, and they were making enough money to live comfortably, even to save a little. They hired a permanent hand, a young man named Tom who lived in the bunkhouse Parker had built and proved to be a hard worker and good company. When James was 2, Willa discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was chasing after a toddler and had less time to focus on her discomfort. Their daughter was born in May, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and made James hide under his father's bed. She was smaller than her brother had been, with delicate features and a full head of dark hair. They named her Sarah Rose Quinn, and from the moment she entered the world, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. "She is beautiful," Parker said, cradling his daughter with such tenderness that Willa's heart ached with love. "Just like her mother. And her brother." Willa asked, looking over at James, who was peeking at his new sister with wide, curious eyes. "James, come meet your sister," Parker said, beckoning the boy closer. James approached cautiously, his small face serious. He looked at the baby for a long moment, then reached out and gently touched her hand. Sarah's fingers curled around his, and James's face broke into a huge smile. "My sister," he said proudly. "Yes," Willa said, her voice choked with emotion. "Your sister. You are going to be such a good big brother." Life with 2 children was chaotic and messy and absolutely wonderful. James took his role as big brother seriously, always wanting to help with Sarah, always protective of her. Sarah adored her brother, her face lighting up whenever he entered the room. The years passed in a blur of activity. The ranch continued to prosper, allowing Parker to expand the herd and improve the property. They added on to the house, giving the children their own room and creating more space for their growing family. Willa's days were full, but she would not have traded them for anything. When James was 6 and Sarah was 4, they had another son whom they named Daniel. And 2 years after that, another daughter, Anna. Their house was full of noise and laughter, of scraped knees and bedtime stories, of small triumphs and everyday miracles. Parker often told Willa that she had given him more than he ever dreamed possible. But Willa knew the truth. They had given each other everything. 2 people who had been alone and struggling had found each other and built a life together. A life full of love and purpose and joy. On their 10th anniversary, Parker took Willa on a rare trip away from the ranch, leaving the children in the capable care of Tom and his wife, Mary, whom Tom had married 2 years earlier. They went back to Montezuma, to the very spot where they had first met. "You remember?" Parker asked, standing in front of the mercantile where Willa had once sat on an overturned crate, mending clothes for strangers. "How could I forget?" Willa said. "I was so desperate, so alone, and then you came along and changed everything." "You changed everything," Parker corrected. "You made me realize what was missing from my life. You made me understand what it meant to have a home, not just a house." "Mend only mine, I will provide," Willa quoted, remembering his words from that first day. "You kept your promise, Parker. You have provided so much more than I ever imagined possible. And you have mended so much more than my clothes," Parker said, taking her hands in his. "You mended my heart, my life, my soul. You made me whole." They stood there for a long moment in the place where their story had begun, and reflected on all they had built together. It had not always been easy. There had been hard times, lean years when they worried about the cattle, illnesses that scared them, moments of doubt and fear. But they had faced it all together, and that had made all the difference. That evening, as they prepared to head back to the ranch and their children, Willa found herself thinking about the young woman she had been 10 years ago. That girl who had sat on a crate, pricking her fingers with a needle, believing she had no future. If she could go back and tell that girl what was coming, tell her about the love and the family and the happiness that awaited her, would that girl even believe it? Probably not, Willa thought with a smile. But it had all come true anyway. Every impossible, wonderful bit of it. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. James grew into a strong, capable young man who loved working the ranch with his father. Sarah developed a talent for healing and announced she wanted to be a doctor, much to Parker's dismay and secret pride. Daniel was the artist of the family, always sketching the landscape and the animals. And Anna was the wild child, fearless and adventurous, reminding Willa so much of what she imagined Parker must have been like as a child. Parker's hair started to gray at the temples, and Willa found laugh lines forming around her eyes. But they both agreed they had never been happier. The ranch had grown to one of the most prosperous in the area, and they had become respected members of the community. You ever think about what might have happened if I had not come along that day? Parker asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains just as they had done thousands of times before. I try not to, Willa admitted. It frightens me to think how close I came to giving up hope entirely. I thank God every day that I decided to stop in Montezuma that morning, Parker said. I had been planning to go straight through to Denver, but something made me stop. I will never know what it was, but I am grateful for it. Fate, Willa said. Or destiny. Or maybe just dumb luck. Whatever it was, I am grateful too. Parker reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. His hands were rough and calloused from years of hard work, but to Willa they were the most beautiful hands in the world. They were hands that had built a home, raised children, and held her through good times and bad. I love you, Willa Quinn, Parker said, his voice as strong and sincere as it had been on their wedding day. I love you too, Parker Quinn, Willa replied. Today, tomorrow, and always. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, one by one, they sat together in comfortable silence. Inside the house, they could hear their children laughing about something, the sound carrying through the open windows. Life was good. Life was full. And Willa knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Years later, when their children were grown and starting families of their own, Parker and Willa still lived on the ranch they had built together. James had taken over most of the day-to-day operations, though Parker still liked to help out when his aging body allowed. Sarah had indeed become a doctor, practicing in Denver but visiting as often as she could. Daniel had moved to San Francisco to pursue his art, and Anna had married a lawyer and was living in Montezuma with her own growing family. The house that had once been filled with the chaos of young children was now quiet most of the time, but it came alive during holidays when everyone gathered. At Christmas, or Thanksgiving, or for birthdays, the house would once again ring with laughter and noise, and Parker and Willa would sit back and watch their legacy unfold before them. We did good, Parker said one Christmas evening, watching his grandchildren play with toys in front of the fireplace. We did very good, Willa agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. Do you have any regrets? Parker asked. Willa thought about it for a moment, really considered the question. She thought about the hard times, the struggles, the moments of fear and doubt. But when she weighed those against all the love, all the joy, all the beautiful memories they had created, there was only one answer. Not a single one, she said. You, not one, Parker confirmed. Except maybe that I did not meet you sooner. We met exactly when we were supposed to, Willa said with the wisdom of age. Everything happened just as it should have. In the final years of their lives, Parker and Willa were rarely apart. They had weathered so much together that the thought of being separated, even for a day, was uncomfortable. They took walks together through the property, slower now but no less enjoyable. They sat together on the porch, watching the world turn and the seasons change. They held hands, talked about their memories, and basked in the love of their family. Parker passed first, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. Willa was heartbroken but also grateful. Grateful for every moment they had shared, every laugh, every kiss, every ordinary day that had made up their extraordinary life together. She lived for 3 more years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and the day he had walked into her life and changed everything. She told them about sitting on a crate in Montezuma, mending clothes for Pennies, and how a handsome cowboy had said 5 words that altered the course of her entire existence. Mend only mine, I will provide, and he had provided. Not just money or security, though those things mattered. He had provided love, partnership, family, and a sense of belonging. He had given her a home and a purpose. He had given her a life worth living. When Willa finally joined Parker, slipping away peacefully in the same bed where they had shared so many nights, their children grieved but also celebrated. They celebrated 2 lives well lived, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. They laid their parents to rest together, under a cottonwood tree on the ranch they had loved, with a headstone that bore both their names and a simple inscription, "Together always." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from parent to child, each generation adding their own touches but keeping the core of what Parker and Willa had built. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set behind the mountains and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, family members would sometimes swear they could see 2 figures sitting on the old porch, holding hands and watching the day end, together as they had always been. The story of Parker and Willa Quinn became something of a legend in Montezuma and the surrounding area. It was told to young couples as an example of true love, shared at weddings as a toast to lasting partnership, and remembered by old-timers as proof that sometimes, when you least expect it, life can surprise you with something wonderful. In a dusty archive in the town hall, there is still a record of a business license issued in September 1883 to Parker Quinn, rancher, for the employment of one Willa Preston, seamstress. But anyone who knew the real story understood that what began as a simple business arrangement had become so much more. It had become a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of kindness, the importance of taking chances, and the way 2 broken people can heal each other and create something whole. The house still stands on the ranch, expanded and modernized but retaining its original log structure. The porch where Parker and Willa spent so many evenings is still there, weathered but sturdy. And sometimes on quiet nights, when the wind whispers through the aspens and the stars shine bright overhead, you can almost hear the echo of their voices, talking and laughing, planning and dreaming, living a love that transcended time itself. Their story reminds us that it is never too late for life to change, that hope can be found in the darkest moments, and that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with a simple offer of help. Parker saw a woman in need and offered her a lifeline. Willa took a chance on a stranger and found her soulmate. Together, they built a life that touched countless others and left a legacy that would endure for generations. In the end, that is what love does. It builds, it endures, it transforms. It takes 2 separate lives and weaves them together into something stronger than either could have been alone. And though Parker and Willa Quinn are long gone, their love story lives on, a bright spot of hope and joy in the sometimes harsh landscape of history, reminding us all that even in the wildest of places, love can bloom and flourish and last forever. The green shirt Willa made for Parker all those years ago still exists, carefully preserved in a cedar chest by one of their great-great-grandchildren. The fabric is faded now, the stitches showing their age, but it remains a tangible link to the past, to a time when a struggling seamstress and a lonely cowboy found each other and discovered that sometimes the best things in life come from the simplest of offers. Mend only mine, I will provide. 5 words that changed 2 lives and created a legacy of love that would never fade.